We'll come to Jess in a minute, but let's stick with John first. And you can also have it for a directed tie. So if you have a directed tie, then you can say the number of links that come to you is your in degree, and the number of links that you send out to others is your out degree. So in general, it is, of course, about things like popularity, and it's mentioned simply as A refers to the number of these links, and it basically says how often is there a link from I to J that is for a particular I. So for an individual actor I, how many links, what's the total number of links that I has with other J's in the network? And of course, that's for in degree. For out degree, it could be how many links do you have to other people. So that represents the in degree and the out degree. Now we are calling this popularity, and I put popularity in quotes. And the reason is that it is popularity if the question that you're asking is, who do you trust, who do you like, who are you friends with, and then that way you can see that a person who has a lot of in degrees gets a lot of links to them, and so on and so forth. However, we should be careful because earlier on before the break, we talked about a link where you're looking at what we call as problematic links. So if the question is, who do you think is a hindrance? And if many people report me as being a hindrance, that gives me a high in degree, but that doesn't make me popular because what people are voting on is that I'm a hindrance. So you have to obviously, based on the nature of the relationship, be careful of how you're interpreting it. But it does mean that somebody with high degree centrality has lots of links. If it's a directed network, it could be how many links they're getting or how many links they're going out with. In a particular graph, in this particular graph, the number should be the same for in degree and out degree as Riju asked because it's a non-directed tie. So if it's a non-directed tie, that doesn't matter. But if it's a directed tie, then the number of links you get may not be the same as the number of links that you are sending out. Okay, so why is this important? Well, here is an example of an article that was published as a Harvard Business case study, and they looked at the networks amongst individuals who are working for the Spanish branch of Moet Hennessy. Some of you may have heard of Moet Hennessy, which is an adult beverage, and it is a branch of Louis Vuitton. Moet Hennessy, LVMH is the name of the firm. And so people did a network analysis within their Barcelona branch, and they were asked to say who within your organization energizes you. And so what you're looking at here is when someone says somebody else energizes them. And you might say, why do you ask somebody about it? It turns out that asking people who energizes you, that is, where is it that you meet with somebody and having met with them, you come out of that conversation feeling energized, is a very important way of taking the network temperature in an organization. And what you see out here are nodes where some nodes are squares, that represents marketing. Some nodes are circles, they represent people who are in finance. The diamond represents those in sales, and the triangle represents those in operations. And what you see out here immediately are some really interesting insights, just by looking again at the visualization that Neelam was pointing out. For one thing, we see that there are some people who are clearly very high in degree. That means a lot of people report that these three people energize them. And looking at these three people, this one is from finance. This particular person is from marketing, and so is this. So you have two people from marketing, and then you have one person in finance who finds that a lot of people are energizing them. So one simple way in which people can use network analysis is to identify these people, is to identify the people who are the energizers within the organization, and that can tell you a lot. There are other examples also of energizers that you can look at in this organization. If you look at it, there are those two people who are in sales who also receive a lot of energizing links. And so just looking at degree centrality, which is such a simple local network metric, can give you some good insights. And in fact, it was used by the organization as a way of trying to help put some change into the organization, talking to the people, identifying who are the energizers, getting them on your side will help you to accomplish a lot of different kinds of goals within the organization. Another more recent example is an article that appeared in Sloan Management Review last year, And in this article, the focus of the article is basically on trying to see whether we can use the same degree centrality as a way of mapping exclusion in the organization. So how can organizational network analysis reveal ways in which we can bolster inclusivity? So here what they did was they again asked people two sets of questions. Who are the people that you go out to when it comes to critical decision making? So who are the people you look at there? And then at the bottom, you look at non-critical decision making. That is, who are the people who you go to for help with decisions that are not critical decisions? And then what the question then is, how are we able to then take the in degrees? And so what we did was we classified people based on gender, men and women, and we also classified them based upon their seniority in the company. So the senior people were the most senior people in the hierarchy, professional were the mid-tier in the hierarchy, and then the junior were the junior people in the hierarchy. And looking at simply how many ties that senior women would have to other senior people, to other professionals, and to other juniors. So those are the color coding. And so there are many things to look at in this graph, but I will just point one to you that I think is quite telling. If you look at the difference between senior women and senior men and the number of ties they have to other senior people, you see there's a difference. That on average, senior men have more connections with other senior people, irrespective of whether they are men or women, as compared to senior women. So right there, you begin to see there is some distinction. There's something wrong here, where why is it that senior men seem to have more connection to other seniors than senior women do? The same thing in a different way applies when we look at professional women. If you look at professional women, this is the number of ties they have to other professionals, that is their peers. And professional men, this is the number of ties they have to other professionals, again, their peers. And you see what a massive difference there is, that professional men, on average, have many, many more ties to other peer professionals than women do. So these are ways in which organizations can look at diagnostics to understand how and why there may be certain levels of inclusivity or the lack thereof within the organization. So if you want to study exclusion or inclusion, this is one way to look at it. I want to go back to a comment that Jayawardena sent in the chat. He said, "Sir, how is the top salesperson an energizer if he only has one link?" That should not be the case. So let me go back and look at which one. The top sales, you said, how is the top salesperson an energizer if he has only one in link? I'm not sure which one you're looking at, but the top sales, there's no top salesperson. The two people in sales who are energizers are these two people. And you can see, oh, I see, you're looking at this person because they have only one in link and not many out link. That may be, that's a typo. Thank you for pointing that out. Jayawardena, good. Good, congratulations. You have quite an eye. I think that is a mistake. That it has a lot of links, but only one in link. So I think Jayawardena is correct. We need to make this correction. This one here is not an energizer. But given that this person has a lot of outgoing links, what you could say is that this person is one who gets energized by a lot of people, because this person reports getting energized by a lot of people, but in turn is not energizing them. So thank you so much for pointing that out. That's a very good point. While we're looking at it, I can also tell you that you see that the people in finance, these are the people in circles, they don't seem to energize each other a lot. You can make all kinds of jokes you want about accountants and finance people, but it seems that the finance people are not the kinds of people who seem to energize one another. There are very few links that are happening on there. And this one person from Energizer who's here is actually the CEO of the organization, whose name is Julio Otaño. So he is the person who's the CEO. He's listed under finance. But overall, finance people don't energize one another. On the other hand, people who are in sales, they're constantly energizing. You see, there are lots of network ties here. And the same thing is also true to some extent with some of the people in marketing. But overall, salespeople seem to energize each other a lot, while the people in finance are definitely not energizing one another. Again, that's another quick diagnostic to do there. Abhishek asks the question, are the number of in and out links only determined by the directions on the links in the network? Yes. In this case, because these are binary links, you simply ask them who energizes you. Then it's getting to that. So Praveen is not impressed. He says this result is obvious and trivial. True, as they say in social sciences and management science, sometimes management science is the deliberation of the obvious, except when it isn't. So sometimes when you look at the results and you go, yeah, that's obvious. We knew that. What's the point of you telling me that? And Praveen would be right. But very often when we look at this, we are not sure that some of these things are always going to be obvious. So as Praveen is now adding, but we can test new hypotheses. And especially if you're looking to do intervention, you may decide which person is going to help you or which area within the organization would need help. Okay. So back again, we looked at gender and exclusion organization and how a simple measure like degree centrality can tell you about that. The next measure that we want to look at now is called Sue and Sam. Almost none of you said that Sue and Sam are important people in the network, right? So there were 10 out of 640 who said Sue was, and 1 out of 640 who said Sam was. Well, guess what? Sue and Sam are also really important in the network for a different reason than what John was important in the network. So why is it that Sue and Sam are important? It turns out that Sue and Sam have the shortest degrees of separation from everyone in the network overall. So if you take Sue is directly connected to people like Jess, but then Sue is also connected through 1 degree of separation to this person, and through 2 degrees of separation to this person, and through 2 degrees of separation to this person. So if we take Sue's direct ties, but not stop with that, also take their indirect ties and say, how short are those indirect ties? Then what we find is that on average, Sue and Sam have the average shortest degrees of separation from everybody else in the network. Why is this important? Well, because if you're looking at a network through which information flows, you could say that if there is any gossip in the network, Sue and Sam are likely to find out about it because they have few degrees of separation from everyone else in the network. And so what that does is that what we then see in that particular situation is exactly why Sue and Sam have a lot of power, because they will be the ones to find out about gossip. Not just find out about gossip, but this is a non-directional tie. So in fact, if you want to start gossip in the organization, the best people to start the gossip with is either Sue or Sam, not John. Even though John is connected to a lot of people, they are not the ones who are able to really spread gossip as much, because many of the people they're connected to are already connected to each other, as was pointed out there. So sometimes Sue and Sam are called the pulse takers in the organization, because they can take the pulse of the entire network because they have few degrees of separation. There are lots of comments that are coming in the thing. One says, are Sue and Sam the bridge? Yeah, you can think of them as a bridge, but I think that we want to save that word for the next word. We want to save that perhaps for Jess. But they are the pulse takers, and Diksha is ahead of us, says Sue and Sam have high closeness centrality. And so basically that's what it is. Sue and Sam have high closeness centrality. How easily one actor can reach the rest of the network? The actor with the shortest average path length to the rest of the network, and that's why they're called as pulse takers. So how do we mean by path length? The distance between any two nodes is the length of any path via the edges or the binary connections between the nodes. So, for example, in this particular network, you could say that if you look at the path between B and E, you can say one path is B to A to C, C to D, D to E. So that's a path length of 4. But there's actually a shorter path length from B to E. You can go simply B to A and A to E. So the word geodesic is used to define the shortest path length between any two nodes. And so that's called the geodesic. And so essentially what is happening is you take the shortest path length between B and every other node in the network, and you calculate that, and you take the average of that, and you do the same thing for every single node. And what you will find is that Sue and Sam have the shortest geodesics with everyone else in the network. So now we come to our next polling question. What is the geodesic between C and H? Praveen Praveen points out that you can have multiple alternative paths, sure, but the shortest path is the one we're interested in. And Praveen, you're right, there could be two shortest paths. There may be situations where an actor X can get to actor Y, and they can do it through one intermediary whose name is P, and a second intermediary whose name is Q. So we are interested in the person with the shortest path. There could be multiple shortest paths. That's absolutely right. You're right about that. So now in this case, I hope I've given you enough time to look at the picture and do the polling question. What is the geodesic distance between C and H? Is it 2? Is it 3, 4, or 5? The geodesic distance between...
I kept the time limit as 5 minutes this time, but that's an accident. So we'll give you 25 seconds.
Okay.
All right, closing now.
Yeah, so Deepali is asking a question about, it's a fairly technical question about board of directors. In general, I think you should mark, if you have links between a person and him or herself, that should be marked as 0, for example. Okay, so we will now look at the results, and I'm going to keep moving ahead. The result is going to be 3 is the correct answer, that 31% of you got it right, 187 of you got that right. And the reason why that geodesic distance between C and H is 3 is because you're basically going C, J, I, and H. And so that gives you a geodesic distance of 3. So now that we've computed geodesic distance and we can get the average geodesic distance, the measure of closeness centrality is simply the mean distance or the average distance for a node I and the average length of the geodesic paths between that node I and every other node in the network. So D sub ij is the length of the shortest path between actor I and actor j. So that's the geodesic distance from I to j. You take that geodesic distance from I to j, you sum it across all j's, and then you divide it by all the j's that can exist in the network. If the network has n nodes, then if you're actor I, you can only have connections to n minus 1 nodes, that is the remaining nodes in the network. So you take that geodesic distance to you take the average of the geodesic distance basically between you and every other node, and that gives you the closeness centrality. And it turns out that in fact the closeness centrality puts Sue and Sam to be important. This is an example of something that you probably didn't see in the network, which is why not many of you did it. This is why analysis comes in handy, where you can do this basic network analysis and get this result. You can extend this idea to look at k-step analysis, where you say, the geodesic distances that we've said could be very high. In some cases, it might be that between me and some other actor, the geodesic distance is going to be 5 or 6. Well, gossip is not going to travel so easily across 5 paths or 6 paths or 7 paths. So why don't we have a compromise? The person who has a high degree centrality, we're only taking into account the people they are directly connected with. In the case of closeness centrality, we are saying we're taking into account how far they are on average with everyone in the network, irrespective of that network, if the geodesic may be 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. So in a situation like that, we can say, no, we can come to a compromise and say, I'm interested in seeing how many people am I connected to within not just my immediate direct connection, but maybe 2 steps. And that's why it's called K-step or 3 steps. Because you think that if there is gossip or information, it really is only going to happen within 2 or 3 steps. So that way you can make a compromise here and say that we come up with something called K-step reach centrality, where is the number of distinct nodes within K links of a given node. And that K could be 2. And it basically says, because within 2 links, you have a high probability of catching what other nodes have. It could be gossip, it could be Omicron, as the case may be. It's an opportunity to catch it earlier, and it's a way to transmit to others also very quickly. So K-step reach is also used as a happy compromise between closeness and degree centrality. The next one is one that many of you talked about, and that was the broker. And in the broker example, what we talked about was Jess. And so if you remember earlier on, Praveen mentioned that Sue and Sam are the bridge, and I said, let's hold that word bridge. And I think that word bridge applies better to Jess than it applies to Sue and Sam. Jess is a broker. Why is that? Because what is happening is that if you look at why is it that Jess is important? Many of you said, oh, Jess is important. But now we can put a very specific algorithmic interpretation to understand why it is that we intuitively thought that Jess was the broker. Jess is a broker because Jess has high betweenness centrality. And that is because Jess controls the group's information flow. How are we going to be calculating this? Well, if you think about it, one of the ways in which we can think about it is how much an actor lies between distinct groups, number of geodesics passing through the actor. So we are still with that term geodesics. We are talking about a geodesic, but now what we are doing is we are saying, instead of looking at Sue and Sam and seeing that Sue and Sam had the average shortest geodesics with everyone in the network, now we are flipping that around and saying, how many geodesics involve Jess? How many of these shortest paths is Jess sitting on? Because if Jess is on a geodesic between two nodes, then as Aditra is pointing out, Jess controls the flow of information between them. Those two people are not going to, the only way they are communicating with each other is through you. So I have a lot of control. I can tell one person one thing, I can tell another person another thing. And I can be sure that they will never find out about it. I can also take some information from one person, combine it with information I take from another person, and come up with my own creative idea, which those two people couldn't because they don't talk to each other. So that's what is important in this particular context. So to go back here, what we are seeing is that an actor between distinct groups and also with a number of geodesics and a broker. So if we look at this graph, this is another network that I think will help us understand this particular notion. So this is a network that was collected, where data was collected from a group at the Pentagon, the United States Department of Defense. And each person was asked to say, who are the people that they trust within the network? And if you look at this network, who do you think is the most powerful player in this network? So Roger, who you see at the top, is the head of the department, and he's the person who called in my friend David Krackhart, who is a professor at Carnegie Mellon. He asked David Krackhart to come in and say, help me map the network. I want to see who's the most important person in this network. And so as you look at this network, I see some answers. Many people are saying Linda. Well, why are you saying Linda? Because you see Linda is having a lot of links. That's the degree. Sonal asks a very good question. Shouldn't this be directional? This could be directional. The way this network is shown here is that a link exists between two people only if both said they trust each other. So it was a directional network, Sonal, you're right. And then it was converted where a link exists between, say, Roger and Linda if both Roger and Linda say that they trust each other. So it was converted into a mutually trusting relationship. So in that sense, it now becomes a non-directed tie. I see some comments, some people saying Linda, some saying Pete, some say Sam. If you look at this network, and is this a video that I should be playing, Neelam? Okay. So this is that same network put into a network packaging tool that you'll be using. And then if you look at this network, wow, you see something very interesting happening to this network, right? If you visualize it, all of a sudden you see that there was a person who was holding that whole network together. Who might that person be? That person happens to be Conrad. Conrad is the person who is connecting two parts of the network. Conrad has high betweenness centrality. Conrad is on the shortest path between everyone on this side of the network and everyone on this side of the network. That's what gives Conrad power. And if you go back to that original graph, without this network metric, analyzing it, you would never have been able to see that Conrad was the most important person in that network. So we are almost out of time, but let's take this question. Does computing measures of node centrality work for networks with multiple components? So we go back to this original network, if you remember. Remember, there were 3 components in this network. And my question is, to what extent can we compute degree centrality in a network that has multiple components. This network, remember, we started today by saying network is a set of nodes and possible ties amongst them. Here we see a network that has three components, one giant component, one smaller component, and then a third component by itself that many of you were really upset about calling it a component because it's only a single node. My question to you is, on this network, can we compute degree centrality? Can we compute closeness? And can we compute betweenness centrality? And therefore, is this a polling question? Okay. Oh yeah, the polling question is up there. Okay, go for it. So which of these three measures that we introduced today would we be able to compute on a network that has multiple components? And Aritra is pointing out that correctly that Conrad is the person who ensures that a component exists. And then Dave says, so can we say a broker connects components within components? I don't know whether you can have a component within a component, because the definition of a component is that it is the largest subset of nodes that are all directly or indirectly connected together. But I think, Dave, what you're saying is that a broker connects two parts of a component that would no longer be a single component if the broker was not around. Then the answer to your question is absolutely. Okay, so we are waiting to see the results on this one. And what do we see as the results here? So we are still waiting on the results. You're all split, right? A third of you said degree, a third of you said closeness, and a little less than a third said betweenness. Well, the correct answer is actually you can compute degree centrality, because degree centrality simply says how many links does a node have. So that can be done for any one of these nodes. When it comes to closeness centrality, it is the extent to which a node is what is the shortest geodesic distance between a node and every other node in a network? Well, there is infinite distance between every node in this component and every node in this component, or for that matter, with the isolate 6. And as a result, we are not able to say that we can compute closeness centrality. So the closeness centrality, which is based on the average geodesic between you and every other node, cannot be computed if you have a node that is disconnected from you. So it can only be computed within a component. It's somewhat of a trick question, but it's towards the end of class. You'll all become now pros at doing all these basic things. And so I wanted to throw it to you. I think one of the things we also, just as a clarity, I don't know whether we made this clear, but multiple selections were allowed in this particular case. So you could actually have chosen multiple selections. I don't know if we made that clear in the polling question or not, but that may be one of the reasons why some of you didn't get both the right answers. And again, betweenness centrality can be computed, because betweenness centrality is only saying what is the number of geodesics that you sit on. It doesn't matter whether those geodesics are in one component or another. And so betweenness centrality can be computed, degree centrality can be computed, but closeness centrality cannot be computed for a network that has multiple components. It can only be computed for a network that has one component. One other technical issue that comes up. So what do you do sometimes if you want to? So let's say you want to compute a surrogate for closeness centrality for a network like this that has multiple components. So one trick that people use is just a strategy that is used. It's not mathematically accurate, but it helps you to get a score for everyone. Is you say, let's say you have a network, let's say we're looking at this component here, right? 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So in this particular network, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, this is a network of 5 nodes, right? Now, let's say you have a network of 5 nodes and you want to say, what is the maximum path, what is the maximum distance between any node in this 5-person network, in this 5-node network and any other node? Anyone want to put in the chat? What is the maximum distance that 4. PGDM says 4. Ayush says 4, right? So there are 4. Okay, very many of you got it right. Okay, so the maximum allowable geodesic distance for a network of size n is n minus 1. In this case, the size of the network is 5, and the maximum geodesic distance is n minus 1, which is 5 minus 1, 4. So what if we were to say that the geodesic distance between one node and another node in a network where there is no direct or indirect connection between them is said to be a little higher than the maximum allowable. So in a network of size n, if the maximum geodesic distance is n minus 1, then you can decide that if you want to look for geodesic distances between nodes that are in different components, you can simply assign the geodesic distance to be n, where n is higher than what would otherwise show up in the graph, because n minus 1 is the maximum geodesic that can show up. So you can call that geodesic to be n. In this case, it would be 5, for example. And that way you can continue with the analysis, because now you're not dealing with the infinity symbol. You're actually dealing with a number that you know is higher than the theoretical maximum that can be found in that network. So that should give you some ideas about how we can take this. There were some questions that came up in the last couple of minutes as we look at the questions here. It says, can you measure, Jayavardhan asks, can you measure node centrality in a multiplex network? Yes, you can measure node centrality in a multiplex network. You can do it either for each of those relations. So you can say, I want nodes. So for example, in the multiplex relation example that we gave, we had authority, trust, and friendship, if I'm not mistaken. So you could have a degree centrality score for authority, for trust, and for friendship. Or you could come up with a node centrality that says, I'm only going to give a score of a degree centrality of 1 if someone has all 3 of them, or maybe has 2 of them. So you can say, how many in this organization do I find people who have both authority and trust together? So you can get a degree centrality for that, where you combine those 2 ties and you define a new tie, which is a multiplex tie that only exists if a pair of actors have both an authority and a trust tie, for example. So there are multiple ways in which you can measure node centrality. Sunita wants to know, how come betweenness centrality for single component? Betweenness centrality for a single component is quite simple, because if you look at this one here, you're looking at the betweenness centrality for node 24. And that basically, the betweenness centrality for node 24 is you look at all the geodesic paths between every pair of nodes within this component. And the geodesic path between any pair of nodes, between every pair of nodes in this component, remember, will be the shortest distance between those nodes. And then you ask yourself the question, how often does 24 show up on that shortest path? If 24 shows up many times on the shortest path, then 24 has high betweenness centrality. So you're able to compute it on the basis of that. And that's how you do it for a single component. Now, it is in principle impossible for 24 to be on a geodesic distance between any node in this component and any node in this component. And that's okay, because all we're looking at is the number of geodesic paths that you're on. And so it's possible that you can compute it even though it's across nodes. I think this may be one of the last questions for today. Rijul asked the question, is it possible for the same node to have highest degree centrality and highest closeness centrality? Absolutely right. You can. In fact, there is a lot of debate about the extent to which these measures of centrality are correlated. What I would basically say is there's always a chance that there's a high closeness, that there is high correlations in some instances. It is not by definition. What I can say by definition is true is that you can't, in general, you can't have high betweenness centrality if you don't have at least a modest amount of degree centrality. Because if degree centrality is going to rely on, if betweenness is going to rely on how many geodesic paths you have, it is helpful to have at least a few links. If you have no links, you can't have high betweenness centrality. So you could say a modest degree centrality is a necessary but not sufficient condition for betweenness centrality, for example. And so Naveen is saying, can we say that the maximum geodesic distance between 2 nodes in Facebook or LinkedIn is 5, assuming 6 is the maximum number of nodes? That is correct. Yes, you could say that that's the maximum geodesic distance that you might find. Okay. So we are at the top of the hour and we are at the end of today's lecture. So again, I want to Thank you all very much for joining us here today. I know that we had some technical issues to start with, and my apologies for the delay in getting started, but hey, we got it all done. So when you're doing your assignment, you're really focusing on that one largest component in terms of the Reddit assignment that you're doing. Okay, so I'm going to leave it to Neelam and
I
Sumi.
just
If you
want
have
to
any
make
closing
one
comments?
quick announcement.
Yes.
So 26th January, we will have session, though in India we have national holiday. So, but still I wanted to make sure that just to inform all the participants, though we have written it on chat also, but please make sure it's on 26th January too. Yes, Neelam. Thank you.
Nothing, that's all. Yep.
Very good. My background, it is virtual. You want to announce something, Neelam?
No, all good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
everyone. Have a good rest of the week. We'll see you back on Republic Day.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, Noshir. Thank you, Neelam. Bye, Ranjini. Bye, Neeraj sir. Bye, Shiri sir.